We live in a time of disruption, that's for certain. What if that disruption includes the breakup of the United States and Canada? Hey, it's season 2 of Breaking History. Mark Trahant here. Remember, if you like this content, take a second to share, subscribe, and add a comment. Strategic scenario planning looks into the future by posting what-if questions. They take what we know about things going on and taking place and then stretching those facts into the imagination. From that, we can learn what might happen, why, and what can be done. So in that spirit, let's talk about the end of the United States and Canada. We start in Yuma, Arizona, where a conservative Facebook group, Liberals Must Go, is posting pictures of proud Albertans working for independence. Quote, Albertan snowbirds were, but in huge numbers, lined up to sign the Alberta Independence Petition. Facebook post said, Alberta needs 177,000 signatures to trigger a referendum. It looks like it's going to be a piece of cake. The context is a proposal for Alberta to split off from the rest of Canada. Supporters of that idea say they have until May 2nd, 2026 to collect more than 177,732 in-person signatures for a referendum asking, do you agree that the province of Alberta should cease to be a part of Canada to become an independent state? Some say that independent question is a ruse. Alberta is a petrochemical state, much like Texas, and supporters fancy a tie to the United States of Donald Trump. There are so many problems to this quest, ranging from how do you separate pensions to ignoring treaties. And speaking of that, First Nation chiefs in Alberta call this a crazy idea, this political fantasy of separation. From City News.
This political fantasy of separation.
From Edmonton to Ottawa, a war of words over Alberta separation. Chiefs and politicians alike fuming over news separatist leaders have met with U.S. government officials in Washington to discuss a divorce from Canada.
In my opinion, that is treasonous activity, and it needs to be called out. It needs to be stopped.
Some Donald Trump allies are now openly talking about Alberta joining the USA. Lawyer Jeff Rath with the Alberta Prosperity Project admits he met with U.S. State Department officials, but says he has no plans to stop.
There is no interference from the United States, and they are respecting Canada's sovereignty in these matters, right? There's no, we're not being told what to do by anybody we're meeting with in Washington. We're exchanging information, right? Which is perfectly appropriate.
To add to this debate, I'm bringing in Carrie Currie Hall. She is Cree, and she's worked with First Nations in Canada for decades and comes from a long line of chiefs. So, Cara, in Alberta, what the heck is going on?
That's everybody's question. It's kind of the same thing that's going on in America. And here's why I would say that. In Alberta, there's been this dialogue about coming from America about 51, right? President Trump was saying that he wanted to annex Alberta and make it the 51st state of the United States of America. And then you watch what Danielle Smith, the premier of Alberta, is doing, and she's carrying out this agenda that looks ironic and scary, similar to Project 2025. She calls hers the Alberta Prosperity Project and the Freedom Alberta, the Free Alberta Project, because I live stateside, but I am from Alberta, Canada, and I've been here for 25 years. So I've been watching this on the United States side, and we see the very same tactics and the same mechanism as much as is possible create chaos. And so that's really what's going on. But what happened for me was the chiefs of Alberta called me to come and chair a meeting last May, and it was an emergency chiefs meeting. And the chiefs were gathering to respond, not react, but to respond to her intention to pass legislation. And her legislation was to allow for a referendum to consider and ask the question, should we separate from Canada? So Alberta has this premier who has intentions of leading towards separation, removing the province of Alberta out of the country of Canada. And there's all kinds of roadblocks in that. But while the chiefs invited me to have this conversation and guide this discussion, they also invited Dr. Matthew Kuncombe. Matthew was my former boss. He was the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations of Canada. And Matthew was the Grand Chief of the Grand Council of Crees in the mid-1990s, if you recall what was going on in the world. The province of Quebec tried the same tactic, and Quebec failed to be able to leave Canada, secede from Canada, and make their own country when they encountered the First Nations people, because First Nations people have unique, distinct, and powerful rights called treaty. In Canada and in Alberta, the treaties that are affected are treaty number 6, 7, and 8. These are numbered treaties. They're very powerful, and number 4 as well. Those treaties there were made with the Crown of England, not the Crown of Canada, the Crown of England. So they are international in nature. So there's a lot of things going on in Alberta, and this premier is very much a protege of Mar-a-Lago and Donald Trump.
The whole idea of, even in Alberta, it's going back more than a decade where people have been trying to push some of this. Why now is it starting to get so much attention? Is it Donald Trump?
Well, I think that, the reason that this, you're right, it's been going on for a couple decades. They do Western Canada or West alienation. They're claiming alienation, and it's really a lack of ability to negotiate a strong relationship with the crown of the country. And it is Donald Trump. That's been highly suspected, and they're bragging about it, the groups that are pushing for it. And it's a small fringe. It's about less than a third of the population group in Alberta. They're saying that 70% of Albertans want to stay in Canada.
I'm here to support Canada. I lived in Quebec in '95 and went to the referendum at the big rally in Place de Canada, and I think it's a bit ridiculous that we're even having this question. So,
well, we believe that Alberta should stay within Canada.
This country should remain whole.
I like freezing in the cold and being a patriot at the same time.
I call them a lunatic fringe because they behave a lot like the January 6th insurrectionists. And they're wild and they're outrageous and they lie, cheat, steal rather than provide facts or reason, good reason. They don't negotiate. And then the Premier of Alberta has spent a lot of time at Mar-a-Lago and often boasts about it. And Mar-a-Lago is, Donald Trump's home, with Donald Trump and what's his name, O'Leary, the data center guy.
In his quest to bring a $70 billion AI data center to northern Alberta, the man known as Mr. Wonderful says Alberta's premier has been wonderful.
All of this is happening simultaneously with support of what I would call a visionary leader.
And he's actually Canadian. I think he's from Toronto. And so it's all ironic, and it is interference. And members of the Alberta Prosperity Project, just recently, I heard the rumors while I was chairing the meetings. I was in several meetings over the last year with the chiefs. And I said, can someone confirm this, that those representatives that are pursuing separation from from Canada have met with the United States government? Because the rumor was that they met with the Secretary of State and the State Department. And then it was actually confirmed. Individuals, not elected individuals, but representing the separation agenda, did in fact come to the United States of America, to Washington, D.C., and met with government officials of Donald Trump's government. And so that was quickly responded to, not just by the treaty chiefs, but by other premiers in the province and even the prime minister, that this is, one, is foreign interference, and two, it is treasonous. And that is the language that they're using, and it's potentially criminal, and she could be removed from office.
What's the role of the extractive industry, especially oil and gas?
That's an industry we know a little bit about because I live in North Dakota in the middle of the Bakken oil play, right? And I've been involved in that since its inception when Senator Dorgan ordered the USGS study. So we're kind of familiar with how that began. And we also know how powerful they really are. So their agenda is America's agenda and not vice versa. They have a lot of money and they have a lot of intention. And one of the gentlemen that came to North Dakota was with Continental Resources, and he shared with the state legislature, we need to find new oil. And so they're looking for it. I don't know if you know a gentleman named Bill McCabe. He's a Navajo petroleum engineer. And Bill says, well, most of the oil formations in the world have been discovered. And if you're going to discover new oil, then you need to discover new methods of extracting it. So increase the technology, improve the technologies. So it's very much part of the Alberta agenda, that Alberta has mineral resources. It's tar sands oil, and they call it the sludge. They are global players. They produce and extract millions of barrels of oil a day. It's a big factor that to gain independence, she believes that she can gain independence by aligning herself very closely with America, utilizing that as the economic tie. But the problem for Danielle Smith is that the only reason Alberta is able to obtain resource wealth is because of a piece of legislation called the NRTA, the Natural Resource Transfer Agreement. The Crown of Canada gifted Alberta the mineral resources almost 100 years ago, and we're closing in on that 100 years. The conversations have been carrying on with treaty chiefs because the province of Alberta receives 100% of the wealth of all of the mineral resources, yet we're the owners of the lands and the minerals. And to date, we receive zero. So the conversation with this new prime minister in Canada is that the natural resource transfer agreement is insufficient and ineffective, and this is not a treaty relationship, and we need to table that again, table by creating a new negotiation mechanism to revisit the whole agreement and to obtain our fair share of the wealth.
What are some of the legal protections that the First Nations have?
Well, their first legal protection is their treaty. Alberta has zero jurisdiction over the treaty, and Canada has an obligation to enforce it on behalf of the Crown of England. So if we start at the treaty, that's all we need. It's the power of the treaty is being tested, and the chiefs are ready. The chiefs, in fact, ordered the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, in May, I think May 4th or 5th last year, to cease and desist. At that day, on that day, she was advancing a proposed piece of legislation called Bill 54, and it was to allow her to have a referendum. What she did in advance of that was reduce the threshold of signatures required for a referendum. She reduced it from 60% to 10% of the previous total of people that voted in the election. So now all she needs is 177,000 signatures to get a referendum to approve the navigation and discussion to advance on separation.
And they're almost using a ruse where they're saying it's to be independent, when in fact the whole design is to become part of the United States.
That's it exactly. And there's even conversation and information that's leaked out that these individuals, Jeffrey Rath is her notorious lawyer, the notorious lawyer, that has a horrible record with treaty nations. They said his dirty dealings, like typical, he's a junkyard dog. He's already sharing information that they're in discussions with the United States of America to start out their separation with a $500 billion loan. He said, what, because you're coming into this with nothing, and you'll take nothing. You're not taking this. The other thing that the chiefs and the treaty nations have on their side is the Constitution of Canada. The Constitution protects us as treaty nations. Our rights are entrenched into the Constitution. You will require a constitutional amendment, but you require the majority of provinces and territories to agree to allow Alberta to separate, which will never happen. So she's really becoming a nuisance because she's creating chaos to cover up her other dealings, like the scandals that have gone on under her leadership. And so we're familiar with that. We can see that played out in the United States, and the very same thing is playing out in Canada.
Speaking of chaos, one of the things we know about the way Donald Trump governs is he often ignores the law and ignores treaties. And if they use the military of the U.S., what's to stop them from just saying, we have a deal, we're going in? And how would Canada respond to something like that?
Well, I think we have a new prime minister in Canada. Donald Trump didn't like Justin Trudeau, the former premier of the Liberal and leader of the Liberal Party, or prime minister, but he liked the leader of the Conservative Party, and Pierre Poilievre. So Donald Trump was endorsing Pierre Poilievre to become the next prime minister of Canada, and this was all within the last year. And an ironic play of things happened. The three parties, the three national big parties, all of that leadership got changed, including Justin Trudeau. In that process, along comes a gentleman named Mark Carney with 16 other people that were running for that leadership. Carney won with 82% of the support from the party. He also has a background as an economist, and he's run the World Bank, and the Bank of England, I think.
As I've been warning for months, America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen.
But he's very, very brilliant. He's very intelligent. So even that was foreign interference with Donald Trump endorsing Pierre Poilievre. And then when he realized that was biting, people got really irked with the whole idea that we're going to be 51, like we don't matter, you're just going to be 51 because he wants you to be 51. And it really caused a unification effort in the country that Canadians were mad at Pierre Poilievre. So it kind of bit Donald Trump. That strategy didn't work. It worked against him. And every time he mentioned Pierre Poilievre, the ratings dropped. His ratings dropped. He lost a 30-point lead to losing seriously. And now he's losing members of his caucus and they're crossing over to the Liberal government.
What happens if he just says we have a referendum and goes in with troops?
Well, I think he'll have a fight on his hand, not with just Canada, but Canada and its allies. And I think Americans would intervene even because common sense citizens in America and the United States of America think this is outrageous. They are apologetic to Canada, that this is not how they feel about Canada. It's how Donald Trump feels about Canada. And I think one of the responding governor last night to the last night's State of the Union, asked the question, is he leading for us? Is he leading on our behalf? And the answer is no, he's not. He's leading for himself. So I say that to say that his statements don't reflect America. And we know that in Canada.
Thank you so much, Kara.
You're welcome.
We think of our political framework as being always. That's never been the case. Alaska and Hawaii only became part of the United States in 1959. What if our generation sees the reverse? In our next episode, we will look at scenarios from the same forces and how that could reshape the United States. From Cascadia to California, Alberta could just be a beginning. I'm Mark Trahant, and this is Breaking History. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Until next week.